I want to welcome you to the Pro Mindset Podcast. The Pro Mindset Podcast is all about diving into the headspace that results in championship performance. High-performing athletes, winners, have this mental flow and have a positive headspace for their performances and success. Join me, Craig Doman, sports attorney and NFL agent, on this podcast. I will interview pro athletes, college athletes, football coaches, and sports personalities. Together, we can discover how you can get in the flow and have your own pro mindset.
Today on Pro Mindset, we have Rick Burton. Rick is currently the head honcho at Syracuse at the David Fox Sports Management Program. And Rick, I want to thank you for being on the show today.
No problem. Great to be with you, and thanks for involving me. It's a cold, snowy day in Syracuse, so it's good to be inside talking to you, Craig.
Okay, so Rick, you have a rich history in sport. Why don't you share for the audience some of the places you've been, and obviously now you're in the education space, but you've also been in the marketing space and in a lot of other spaces in sports.
Yeah, happy to do it for you. Listen, a really strange, counterintuitive career. I think that probably very few people have kind of gone down the path I have. I started off as a sports writer, and I, jokingly call myself an ink-stained wretch, back in the day when there were daily newspapers and people read them. And I was fortunate enough to be able to cover Syracuse University's football and basketball team and the opening of the Carrier Dome. And just an exciting time to be a young single guy working in sports, which had always been my objective, to see if I could build a career around that. And about a year and a half into working for the newspaper, I got hired by Miller Brewing Company in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to go out their corporate headquarters and do sports public relations for them. And Miller was just getting into spending a lot of money in sponsorship. They were in auto racing, the NFL, the NBA, and I was kind of a pig in heaven, I guess. It was that, here I was a young guy, just graduated from college, and all of a sudden I was working for a beer company and going around to some of the biggest sporting events in the world, and then lucky enough to get promoted into the marketing side, brand management at Miller, and ultimately my career went to a point where I was the advertising manager for the old Miller Lite Tastes Great, Less Filling ad campaign that used to feature all the old NFL and NBA pros, Deacon Jones and Bubba Smith and Dick Butkus, guys that I had really grown up, fans of their performances. And so it was a great ride. We were in Milwaukee for about 12 years, and then I left to go to work for a sports marketing agency and had the National Football League as my primary client. Did that for about 3 years, and then took a real strange turn, went out to the University of Oregon, had a chance to get involved with a sports marketing program there in the College of Business, named for Jim Warsaw, who was one of the great sport merchandisers of all time. And Jim had sold his company to Nike and had given some money to the university, and I ultimately ended up as the director of the Warsaw Sports Marketing Center and doing consulting for sports leagues around the world, largely because I had worked for the NFL on the agency side. And, went into the Philippines and did some stuff with the Philippine Basketball Association, into Japan for the J-League, the Professional Soccer League, and over to Australia for the Pro Basketball League. And after about 8 years at the University of Oregon, go Ducks, if there's any Pac-10, Pac-12 people listening, I got the opportunity to go down to Australia as the commissioner of the Pro Basketball League down there, the National Basketball League, and jumped at the chance to get some international experience and frankly to see if I was, good enough to run a sports league. Now, the NBL is small compared to leagues here in the United States, but it was a great opportunity, I think, for me to look at, the key issues in professional sports and look at them firsthand as the commissioner. Came back to the U.S. As the chief marketing officer for the U.S. Olympic Committee, for the 2008 Beijing Summer Olympics, and then career reversed again, altered course again, and David Falk came after me to return to my alma mater. The Syracuse University had just started a sports management program, and David wanted me to come back and be the David Falk Professor of Sport Management, and I thought if he was good enough for Michael Jordan, he was more than good enough for me, and so I took him up on that offer, and I've been at Syracuse since about the end of 2009. And I won't get into any of the stuff I've done at Syracuse because this answer is longer than it needs to be, but it's been a great run, and I'm just blessed to have had all those opportunities.
You have been across the globe in multiple sports, Olympics, football, basketball, soccer, you name it. Let me ask you this. When you shut it down and you're in your rocking chair and maybe you're getting interviewed for your memoirs, what is the one thing that made the biggest impact on you of all those experiences?
You know, I think one of them is kind of a small thing, but it still resonates really largely with me. When I was working at Miller, I had been there 10 or 11 years, and I was a real corporate guy, and I was loyal, and I thought that loyalty alone was something that would be rewarded. And we got a new vice president of marketing, a guy who became a dear friend named Dick Strupp, and Strupp was a really competitive guy, and you know, where a lot of the executives ate in the executive dining room, he didn't. And he wanted to play basketball at lunch. And he found a bunch of us who were working at Miller that, you know, wanted to go and get in a good 1-hour run, you know, workout, play hardcore asphalt basketball up at a city park. And I kind of fell into that group. And Dick was the kind of guy that if you didn't take it to the rack, if you didn't, you know, go strong to the hole, he really didn't want you on his team. He wanted guys that really had a fire in their belly. And I think he really upped my competitive game because he was just so passionate about it. And I remember sitting down with him at one point and saying, hey, Dick, you know, what's my career look like here at Miller? I'm one of your guys. And he said, Rick, you need to get out of here. You need to leave. You've been at Miller 10 years. We're not going to reward you for your loyalty. You need to go somewhere else and see how they do business there. And I left and went to the sports marketing agency where I had the NFL as my client. And I'd say I learned more in 2 years at that sports marketing agency than I had maybe in some ways in the 10 years at Miller. And I think looking back, I just have to always be appreciative for kind of those two pieces that Dick Strupp gave me. One, which was to be competitive about things and to know when to get out. There's a line I heard recently, heroes know when to die. And I think it was, you know, he had the confidence in my abilities to say, you need to leave here, you can do better. And he wasn't pushing me out. I mean, I could have stayed. But what he was telling me was I could fly a lot higher. And I think I'm just always going to be appreciative for that.
Well, that's a wonderful story. That kind of takes me into one of my topic areas today, which is Deshaun Watson is down in Houston. And he won a national championship with Dabo and Clemson. And, you know, I think they went like 4-12 or something like that this year. He's one of the rising stars, you know, perennial Pro Bowl quarterbacks in the NFL. And he asked for a trade today. If you're the owner, if you're Cal McNair, if you're the general manager, how would you handle that situation? And is that something that, from your professional experience, you could see the organization fixing? Or do you think he needs to get out like you needed to get out of Miller?
You know, I think it's a great question, and if I'm looking at it from the team side as the owner or general manager, I'm in the process of bringing in a new coach, quarterbacks coach with the Ravens, and Deshaun may not actually fit with the offensive nature of how the Ravens were working with their guy. I think the other thing is that if I'm the GM or the owner, I'm going through a mathematic calculus of what I can get for Deshaun if I'm not going to just lose him outright. And I think if I can't get anything for him and he's going to be dissatisfied, he's going to be a disgruntled quarterback, the position is too critical to the future of the organization to have him be that way. I think that if I've got a new coach coming in and we can target a quarterback in the draft, and you would know more than I would, Craig, as to whether or not this is a great quarterback year. I know Trevor Lawrence is coming out, but beyond that, Ian Book, I think there's a couple of good ones, but I don't know whether the Texans are in a position to get a quality quarterback. You know, the quarterback roulette is really tricky. If you look at the Colts right now with Phil Rivers retiring, and the Colts are kind of signaling they want to go after a veteran. I think a lot of things are up in the air right now, but generally you don't want to hang on to people that are going to be a cancer in your locker room. And I think if I'm looking at it from Deshaun's point of view, he's probably saying, you guys haven't put enough of a team around me for us to be really competitive, and I don't think you're going to do that anytime soon. So I want to get to some place where I've really got a chance to win. That's my read, but you know, you're going to know more than I would on a couple of those pieces.
Well, it's an interesting quagmire for the organization because they're really in a lose-lose situation. If they trade him and he ends up taking the next organization to the Super Bowl, they're going to disenfranchise their fans. And if they keep him and he's a cancer like you suggested, which he could be, he's already got his money, then it's going to show up on the field. Every single play, you have to play with an edge because you could get killed. You could get seriously injured if you're not all in. And so for someone like Watson, he needs to be all in. So if he's not all in, it's not going to be a pretty sight at all. So
no, and I'd rather take the risk of trading him and having him do well. I mean, you know, the Patriots are going to get on to life after Brady. And that's sometimes the luck of the draw, but at least get something for him rather than having him play unhappy. And, you know, I'll tell you about a book that I use in one of my classes at Syracuse, and it's called The Captain Class. It's by the Wall Street Journal sports editor, Sam Walker. And he talks about the critical importance in the greatest legacy teams. They've always had a great captain. And on almost every NFL team, the quarterback is the captain, at least of the offense, and in a lot of cases, the captain of the locker room. And you cannot win, I don't believe, if the captain of your team is not all in. And I think with Deshaun's announcement today, you can never again trust that he really is going to be all in, at least in Houston. He may get there in somewhere else, but I have a hard time believing it'll happen with the Texans.
I 1,000% agree with that. And because there's so many NFL teams that are starving for quarterbacks right now that might overpackage picks and players to get them, it could be the biggest deal ever. It probably would be. And it might set the franchise up to be in a better place than they were or they are today if they went ahead and did the trade, as long as they make good selections with those picks.
Yeah, and what you're so right about is that there's no position more important in football than the quarterback. So you can actually charge a premium for an all-pro quarterback. You've got your greatest leverage, and you've got weak teams that know that if they don't get a great quarterback, they have a problem because they can't elevate their game fast enough. And in an era of Mahomes and Rodgers is not done yet, I think, Brady's not done yet. So to get a Deshaun Watson is going to immediately lift the right team, and they're going to be willing to mortgage some of their future to get that quarterback now, because every NFL owner is in a win-now mentality.
Okay, so here's the question. If the Jacksonville Jaguars would be the best trade suitor, not for the fact that they're in the same division, would it make sense for both of those organizations to make that trade when Houston's going to get Trevor Lawrence and obviously the Jags are going to get the Pro Bowl quarterback, but it's like they're in the same division?
Yeah, you never really want to stock the cupboard of someone you're going to see with a lot of regularity, twice a year. You'd prefer to go outside your division, but again, it's not always possible, and it depends on what someone is willing to offer you. I don't think Jacksonville is going to give up on what they hope to get in Trevor Lawrence. I don't see that happening because Trevor is going to be one of the most exciting young quarterbacks to come into the league. And I think there's going to be a little bit of a stigma wrapped around Deshaun that, and this is unfortunate for Deshaun because it's not deserved necessarily, but that he didn't get it done in Houston. So he didn't he didn't emerge as a winner. And again, like I say, I don't think that's his fault, but that's going to be the baggage he has to carry with him. And so I don't think Jacksonville makes that trade.
Okay, so let's switch to the Olympics. Everybody talks about the Olympic spirit, and the Olympics only comes around once every 4 years for the respective Winter and Summer Olympics. And some of those stories are just amazing in terms of the obstacles, adversity, hurdles guys and girls have had to overcome to get to the Olympics. What is kind of your perspective of the Olympic spirit, the Olympic mindset? What kind of athlete is most suitable to be successful as an Olympian? Because not everybody is.
Well, the first word that comes to my mind is really, and it's an unfortunate word, but I think there's an accuracy to it, which is that they have to be selfish. I think they've got to really be able to put themselves ahead of everybody else because they are trying to literally be the best in the world. And I think a lot of us, are trained to not like selfish people, and sometimes we don't like people who sacrifice everything and everyone around them to be the best at something. Once they are the best, then we all want to be friends with them or relatives with them, and we want to praise their hard work and their dedication and their discipline. But I think when you're talking about a 15-year-old or an 18-year-old and saying, that they are going to have to sacrifice everything else, because the difference between, and I saw this in my time with the U.S. Olympic Committee, the difference between making the Olympic team and not making it can in some cases be 1/100th of a second. It can be that they took one extra breath during an event. And so I think that we love our Olympians, and they are always Olympians. You're never an ex-Olympian or a former Olympian. But to become one, you've got to actually make a commitment that I think most of us could not make.
Well, I think the thing that comes to mind from listening to your answer and being involved with the Olympics from a spouse standpoint is the all-in factor. There isn't another sport that you go all in hoping that when they do the qualifying that you actually get to go. I mean, if you're on the PGA Tour, you're all in, but you're already on the tour.
Right. Yeah. And if you're on the tour, whether you're playing well, and it may go up and down from week to week. The Olympians, have to train for one moment, which is usually the Olympic trials or the World Championships, in order to be picked in most cases, certainly in the United States, to represent the U.S. And if you don't make it happen during the trials, you don't make the team. You could be the best in the world all year long. You don't do it at the trials, which is what the USOC is looking for you to prove that you can do it under pressure. You don't go. Now, the other thing that can happen is your country can boycott the games, or what's happening now with Tokyo 2020 has been off a year, and 2021 is in the news that it might not happen. Well, you trained all your life for 2020. You kept your elite status for a little bit more into 2021, and now we're on the cusp of telling you, sorry, they're just gone. These games aren't going to happen. Hope you can hang around until 2024. It's an enormously difficult life.
Absolutely. And I think the other part of it is your whole identity in the sport is not all the hard work you've put in for 5, 10, 15 years. It's what you do in that 5, 10 seconds or whatever that event may take.
Right.
And that's your whole identity. That's your marketing leverage. It's your potential income. Everything, your speaking appearances and different things like that down the road. Everything is hinged on one event.
And in a lot of cases, you may be up against, a legend, and the legend is almost in some cases, seems supernatural. If you look at Phelps in swimming or Simone Biles in gymnastics and Katie Ledecky, some of these athletes just, I chuckle, they almost seem like they're from another world. And, your chance not only of making the team hinges in some part on whether or not you can take down a legend. It's tricky business. And yet, the new wave of elite athletes comes along every year. and you just have to have everything fall into place. And I think that's in part where the selfishness comes from, which is you're trying to explain to your loved ones, I apologize that my behavior is so incredibly focused, but if I'm not this focused, it can slip away from me in a second.
The synonym for selfish is focused. It's a more positive overtone, but if you're not dialed in, if you're not focused, if you're not like eliminating all distractions, saying no to a lot of things other people can say yes to, you have no chance of being at the top of the world.
Yeah. And you have to be willing to pee into the cup, at a moment's notice, because they come and knock on your door all the time to find out if you're using illegal drugs. So it's a lifestyle that a lot of people wouldn't seek. But like celebrity, like movie stars, like authors of books, I think a lot of people imagine that it would be fun to be famous for a while. I just hope I don't have to put in all the hard work that goes with, getting you to the point of being famous.
No question about it. Let's go to the Falk Institute at Syracuse University, and you have all these young kids that want to go into sports. You've built a curriculum around that. What's the single most important thing you teach the students that if they miss this class or miss this day in class, they're not going to really understand the richness of what you're trying to portray?
I think one of the things that I teach, and I'm thinking of your son JoJo now being at the University of Nebraska, because I worked with a guy at Miller who got a scholarship to the University of Nebraska as a baseball pitcher. He threw out his arm freshman year and transferred to Nebraska Wesleyan and led the nation in punting. A guy named Jay Lindstrom, an old friend from 100 years ago. But Jay was from Nebraska, and he said that his father had always said to him that fair is for pigs. And by that F-A-I-R, fair, that you took pigs to the state fair. And I think one of the things that I teach really hard on is that life is not fair. And I don't want my students using that they're somehow entitled or they deserve something, or that, life should be kind to them. That if there was one thing I think that they might be taking away from one of my classes, it was going to be, you've got to put the time in, and it's on so many levels. It's intellectual, it's spiritual, it's emotional. You cannot, in the baseball term, you cannot short hop it. You've got to be, and it's like what you said a few minutes ago about football, playing in the NFL. If you are not all in on every snap, you're going to get hurt. And I think that I'm trying to bring, both that awareness that I've had from my career, that intensity, that commitment that you've got to make to your own career. And I think that a lot of college students are really just kind of floating along. They're waiting for mom and dad to kind of, set them up. In fact, Craig, one of the funny stories I've heard, I can't believe that it's true, but I've heard it, but that something like 10% of all recent college graduates are bringing their mothers with them to their first job interview. Yeah, I can't believe it's true, but I've read it, so, it's on the internet, so it must be true.
Yeah, it's true.
But it's one of those things where I honestly believe there's a generation of kids out there, not the entire generation, but a lot of kids who it's always been done for them by somebody else, and they're expecting that it's still going to be handed to them when they graduate. They're going to go, look at me, I graduated, I got a degree. Now you guys are going to give me a job, right? And I think my teaching style is one of saying, don't bet on it, home slice. You need to bring your own game.
No doubt about it. One of the conversations that I have with a lot of parents who have kids going on to play college sports is helping them understand that it's not going to be fair. It's going to be unpredictable. You're going to get over-recruited. You were already lied to when the coach promised you whatever he promised you or she promised you.
Yeah.
And if they don't overpromise, you don't go to that school. Nick Saban has to tell everybody, hey, you got a chance to be a Heisman Trophy winner. You have a chance to be a first-round pick. He tells everybody that. Not everybody that goes to Alabama gets to do those things. So it stands to reason that Just because you get a piece of paper doesn't mean you're going to get a good job.
Right.
Doesn't matter if you're Ivy League. It doesn't matter what degree it is. You've got to go get. You got to be a bird dog. You got to go get it, and you got to be okay with not getting it and being told no a bunch of times, because it's very unlikely. At least it's never happened to people I know. First job you interview for, you get it. Second one, you get it. You get all the promotions. Everything goes smooth. And 40 years later, you never had a failure. Doesn't happen. Everybody fails, right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that, you know, I use the initials of the NFL. It's a famous Bum Phillips line. You know, NFL stands for not for long. You know, and you've heard that statement with a lot of the guys that you've represented, that, you know, if you want to stay in this league, you're going to have to want it a little bit more, because there are a lot of guys that can do what you do. So I think that, you know, students coming out of universities, you know, we're pushing them to get internships, to get work experience, you know, to do the extra, to go the 10th inning kind of stuff, all the bad cliches. But I think the kids that pick up on that are the sharp ones, and I think you can tell pretty quickly. And I tell that to the students in my classes. I go, some of you are going to emerge as favorites in this class. You're going to thrust yourself forward. You're going to put your hand up. You're going to talk in class. You're going to meet me. You're going to be all in. And a bunch of others of you are going to sit back, and your body language is going to say, dude, I'm just here to get a grade. I'm not into whatever it is you're trying to teach, and I just hope you'll make this easy for me. And I said, and so I want you guys to know that the class will separate very early on into really 3 tiers, which is going to be kind of the fearless ones, not always sitting at the front, but the ones that are thrusting themselves into the fray. The middle ones, which are smart and capable, they just don't want to put their hands up. They don't want to talk in class. They'll do what's asked of them, but I won't learn their names. And then there'll be a whole, you know, group of students that are looking to cut class, not do the readings, that are just kind of coasting along and hoping it works out down the road.
Well, here's the beautiful thing about the NFL and professional sports, for that matter, is second and third groups don't make it. The talented guy that it's not all in is not going to make it in the NFL. And certainly the third group doesn't have a shot.
Right.
They probably will get eliminated through the draft evaluation process.
Right.
So the only guys that have a chance are the guys that are in that first group that engage with the process, go all in, take risk, stick their neck out, and a lot of those guys aren't going to make it either.
Right. And listen, they're all pro guys that get cut every year. You know, first-round draft choices that get cut. Players that don't live up to that evil word potential and get beat out by guys from universities that most people have never heard of. It's a hard business. But life is like that, right? And I can't sit here and be cocky. I've had my own failures, and I'm sure you have as well. And it's another part of it is how you pick yourself up off the ground.
No question. Okay, so let's talk about first-rounders. They get drafted in the first round because of enormous potential. They're blessed with tremendous God-given ability in most cases. And depending on the position, they've got terrific performance as well. Why do roughly 50% of those guys bust year in and year out? And teams have spent millions of dollars, zillions of hours evaluating these guys, and yet still 50% or so end up becoming busts.
Yeah, I think there are 2 factors that I at least point to, and I think you would have a much better handle than I would. But, one is that they've always been great in high school where the competition was pretty mediocre, and then great in college where the competition was good, and now it's at a whole nother level. And, Joe Montana one time, I'm sure you've seen kind of the demonstration. I was at a small private event with him, and I can't act like I know him, but he was very kind and generous with his time. But he talked about a quarterback making a throw in high school, and he said the defensive back will be 10 yards off of the wide receiver. If you can't hit a high school wide receiver, you don't have an arm. And then he talked about in college the defensive back would be about 3 yards off the receiver, an arm's length. And then he kind of comes over and he sits on your lap and he says, if you can't, and we talk about the window or the small box, if you can't put the throw through this incredibly small window on just about every throw at the NFL level, you're not cut out for the NFL. And some guys can't make that throw at that next level up. So my first thing is they're not ready for the degree of competition and what's required of them. I think the other thing is usually the money. I hate to quote Cyndi Lauper and say money changes everything, but I think there's a point where you give somebody who's never had any money $20 million for signing. I just think it's really hard to stay focused, that word we used a couple of moments ago, that the $20 million means nothing. You really have got to disregard what they just signed you for. You've got to get rid of the posse. You got to come in like the lowest of the low and want it really bad. And yet I think year in and year out there are first-round quarterbacks who, show up at training camp in Rolls Royces, and it gets blown up right away.
Well, Rick, those are terrific perspectives, and they're absolutely spot on. Haven't heard the first one said like you said it, but it's so true. It's difficult when great has to play against great. When great's playing against good, they're always great. But when great goes versus great, some great guy's going to lose. And that's that degree of competition.
Greg, think about it. A lot of times when great goes against great and they've never gone against great or not a lot of great, they crumble because it's the first time they've really had to deal with failure. And Brady was a 6th-round draft choice who was not an all-star in college. Good, but I think he had dealt with a lot of stuff that made him want it that much more. And listen, you got to give him props. 100 years later, the fact that he's still making the throws he's making, that's defying gravity kind of.
That's amazing. It's amazing. So we've got a passing of the torch in the Super Bowl coming up next week. Arguably the GOAT. I don't even think you need to argue about Tom Brady. He's by himself at the top of the quarterback list in terms of just, I don't care what generation. I don't care if they did before they had or when they had leather helmets. This guy is the undisputed GOAT. And then you've got Patrick Mahomes. What's your take on Patrick Mahomes?
None better. I think, technically in some ways he's better than Brady right now. The discussion of GOATness is really kind of funny, old GOAT, young GOAT. Brady is the GOAT, although my guy would have been Johnny Unitas, but his statistics wouldn't hold up against Brady. But, I think this is not an issue of who's better at throwing or, who drops back in the pocket better or, who goes through his progressions better. I think this is a question of a game, a single game where the storyline happily crowns Mahomes if he wins it. And I think the sports writers will lose their mind if Brady wins it. They'll be happy to tell you that Mahomes is technically right now a better quarterback because he's 100 years younger than Tom. But I think that there's a decent chance that the Bucks win the game, and it's factors that Brady brings. But even if it's not Brady himself, if you look at Manning's last Super Bowl championship with Denver, he played pretty ordinarily. I'm trying to look for a word that's like average. He did not have a great game, but Denver won the game. I don't think that takes anything away from Peyton Manning's reputation as a great quarterback. And I don't think Tom has to have insane statistics in this game. I think Brady just has to win. And that's what's, I think, interesting here is Mahomes is probably putting the team on his back. I think Brady is probably talking to his guys about what it's going to take.
That's a great perspective. And I think that some of the most successful athletes realize you can't do it by yourself. And if Tom Brady can, like this old saying, high tide raises all boats.
Yeah.
That's Brady. He's in the locker room, all 3 phases of the game. No, he's not playing. He's not on special teams and he's not on defense, but he's there because he's helping everybody believe that we've got a guy as a general that's done this 6 times and won it. So we're going to be okay. So it gives everybody a little bit more confidence than they would have than if there was another quarterback that was even more physically gifted and 20 years younger than Tom.
Yeah. And Craig, listen, this is the fun part. If Craig goes into that locker room with, I think the majority of the Tampa Bay Buckeyes have never played in a Super Bowl, ever, right? And if he says, hey, guys, listen to me. I've won this thing 6 times. I've lost it 3 times. This is what it takes. This is the difference between winning and losing, and this is how you have to think about the game. I think those guys are dialing in because who better to tell you what it's going to take?
He's E.F. Hutton, so to speak, in terms of just, everybody's going to listen to that guy. They're going to listen to him more than they're going to listen to their coaches.
I think so. I mean, the coaches are going to have them drilled to what they have to do, and everybody's going to know which plays they're going to run and, how they have to win their own competition at left tackle. But at the end of the day, I think there are some intangibles, and I'll give a shout-out to a great book that I'm using now in my class by a San Francisco sports writer named Joan Ryan, Joan, Joan Ryan, called Intangibles. And there are intangibles that the greats bring with them. And listen, Patrick Mahomes has the intangibles as well. So I think we're going to get a really good game. But I'm not opposed to the fact that Brady could win this with ordinary statistics.
I agree with you. In Joan's book, Intangibles, everybody understands what that means. But was there anything that she said that was a surprise to you?
She actually kind of got involved with the neurology of how a team is bonded together and almost kind of like the chemical functions in your head. And it's, way too intelligent for me. She broke it down so that, a third grader can understand it. But there are some real nuances to how you build intangibles with your teammates. And we get into areas of trust and belief and faith. And, I think when Tom Brady came into that Bucs training camp, probably back in July, and when he started working out with his receivers, when he started to gel with his offensive line, when he barked at guys who didn't do what they were supposed to do, people were either starting to buy into the intangibles that Tom represents or not. And I think the Chiefs have got their own set of intangibles. So one is not necessarily better than the other, but you've got to have it. And I think that's what Joan found in her research, was that there is a huge value in how tightly wound a team is, how much they believe in each other.
Well, and I think different successful coaches do it differently. Bill Snyder at Kansas State had the 16 family principles that he lived by to create a family. And then they demonstrated it physically before every game by walking arm in arm in lanes to come on the field for battle. And, Nick Saban, he has the process.
Right.
And it's like the process, since he's been so uber successful, the process allows him and his program to continue to be at the top of the college football world, even though his coordinators keep leaving. He's bringing in new people every year.
But I agree with your point, Craig. It's, whether we're talking the process in Tuscaloosa or we're talking about Snyder at K-State, you bond your team and it's band of brothers. And I think football is our closest relative to warfare. And, that trench mentality, that foxhole mentality, you've got to believe in your guys. And I think the teams that have superstars that stand apart from everybody else on the team, I think they usually struggle because they're not bonded with the rank and file.
Well, there's no question that if you look at any college football season or any NFL season and you see a team that has spiked, like Iowa State this year in college football, beat Oklahoma, finished in the top 10, projected to be in the top 10 next year. There has to be something special going on in the intangible area, because on talent and on recruiting lists, they're not even in the top 40.
And yet they're getting it done.
And the NFL's the same way. Every year somebody pops up and wins their division or surprises everybody, and they pretty much have the same guys they had before, maybe with the exception of one or two guys that are infused in the culture that changes the intangibles, that creates that unity, that brotherhood, that fellowship, all those things that describe, hey, I got your back, you got my back.
Look at Buffalo and their quarterback Allen this past year suddenly has the breakout year. his first 2 years, I think his statistics were among the worst in the NFL. And yet the Bills put the right team together around him, and the Bills make it to the Final Four. And you can go in and you can study why these things happen. And I think that's a lot of what Joan did with her book.
Yeah, you've written a couple books. Why don't you share one of yours?
Well, I think one that I'm very proud of is called 20 Secrets to Success for NCAA Student Athletes. And I think it's one that, in my role as the faculty athletic rep at Syracuse, I'm pretty fortunate to be able to work closely with our athletic department and to get to know our coaches and a lot of our players. And I helped co-author a book. It is available on Amazon. Rick Burton, 20 Secrets. That ought to be enough coding to get you to the book. And it's really for high school kids coming out, getting ready to go into college, or college kids who are already playing a sport, on a scholarship or during a 4-year process. And it really is advice, kind of like if you look at Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. These are 20 secrets for NCAA student athletes to get the absolute most out of their time in college.
Rick, I want to interject here. I want you to name one that would surprise the audience.
I think it's a line from Oliver Luck, who used to be the number 2 at the NCAA, and I'm just going to synthesize it down. It's that your degree should be your A game plan, and playing professional sports should be your B plan. That you're trying during those 4 years of college to make sure that you get everything you can out of that university is going to set you up for the rest of your life. I think there's nothing sadder than looking at college athletes who were stars on the field for 3 or 4 years, and 5 years after they graduate, they're homeless, or they really have nothing going on for them, and they put everything into being a pro athlete and the dream of the big money. And in a lot of cases, they get the big money early that first year, but then can't stick. But because they didn't put anything into trying to get a college education, they're now in a much worse off situation. So I think, that one major takeaway from 20 Secrets is that university is set up to have you be successful for the rest of your life. And if you get a college degree, there's a likelihood that you will always be employable, if you manage to learn some things while you're in college.
Okay, obviously I agree with that. And so my next question is not to be an antagonist. It's just to try to understand, how do you balance what we talked about earlier? And Olympians have to be all in. They have to be selfish. They have to be all in their sport, really not focused on school. In some years, they basically take a year off so they can just be 100% dedicated to their sport.
Yeah, I think that they have to have resting periods. And listen, it takes a lot of discipline, but I think that in an age of online classes and internet education and YouTube, I think the choice of saying, I am only going to know about how to be good at my sport and nothing else is a really narrow game plan. And that's why in our book, we talk about make the rest of your life the A plan, and make your sport, even though it's what you're all in on, make that the B plan, because at some point you will stop being an athlete and you'll have to go on to being other things. And we think that you've got to make some kind of a commitment to, the life you want 20 years from now that may not involve your sport. And I say that, Craig, because a lot of times we're talking about people who are 20. A quick funny story for you. I had a job interview real early on in my career. I was sports writer, as I mentioned, at the Syracuse paper, but I had the chance to interview for a job. I'd made it through all the entry-level interviews and had done really well, and then the boss, the man making the decision, said, what do you see yourself doing 5 years from now? And I was like 21 years old, and 5 years from now was like 100 years from now, and I didn't give the right answer, and I didn't get the job. But I didn't give the right answer because I didn't understand that 5 years would happen really quickly. I thought 5 years was like 50 years. And in fact, 5 years is more like 5 minutes. So
Yeah.
I think we serve our young athletes really well by trying to get them to understand how time actually moves. And that's part of what we hope we do in our book.
I think something else that people make mistakes on is they cherry pick. So when you are sitting down with Tom Brady at the University of Michigan 23 years ago or whatever it's been, saying, hey, you better plan for life after football, there's not going to be much after that. I mean, he's not going to have to work. He can make an impact on society. He can get involved in other businesses. He can, run a foundation. He can do all these things. But he's been able to defy Father Time, play for more than 2 decades. And so what everybody does is they cherry pick. And every quarterback that comes through the system thinks they're going to be the next Tom Brady.
I wish we had Tom on the call right now, because I wonder if Drew Bledsoe hadn't gotten hurt. Is there an alternate universe where Tom Brady was a backup quarterback for 2 or 3 years and then out of the league?
Oh,
and I don't think we'll ever know. But as I recall, I think Tom paid attention while he was at the University of Michigan and actually got his degree, I think, and it might have been in business. And I have this feeling that Tom would have been really successful if he had ended up in the business world 2 or 3 years after he graduated. Some of that is just, I think, his drive. But I think we'll never know how close we came to never knowing about Tom Brady.
Okay. Very good point. Point well taken. We could say that about every professional athlete. The difference between potentially being a Hall of Famer and being someone that's forgotten is very slim.
Yeah, very, very slim. And listen, there are the GOATs, right? There are the Jordans and the LeBrons that are just spectacular athletes, but their commitment. And if you watched the Jordan documentary that was on during the summer when we were all locked in with COVID, I think his focus, back to that word, man, was he dedicated. And I think LeBron is the same way, and I think Brady is the same way. And the greats we talk about, Sampras or, Nadal. I mean, I don't know that it matters what sport you're in. These guys are just really, really dedicated to their craft.
Rick, thank you so much for being on, and I just want to wish you the best of luck and just have a great day.
Yeah, thanks, Craig, and best to the family, and let me know if I can ever help again.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Pro Mindset. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. You can follow us on our website, promindsetpodcast.com, or on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Pro Mindset Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you the next time.